Welcome to the Expert Edge. This is the show where we bring on experts in their fields of health and wellness practice. We hear their stories and we learn what they see working in the field of diabetes reversal and prevention. So I'm happy to introduce today's guest, Dr. Hillel Harris. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Dr. Harris is a dual-boarded emergency and lifestyle medicine physician with over 20 years of experience in emergency medicine. He's a certified sports nutritionist and holds the Exercise as Medicine credential from the American College of Sports Medicine. He completed his emergency medicine residency from Wayne State University at Detroit Medical Center in 2008. So, Dr. Harris, before we dive into the content for today's interview, I would love to know, how did you get started with your interest in that intersection of lifestyle and health?
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here today. Yeah, that's a very good question. Everybody wants to know how I got started in lifestyle medicine and disease prevention and health prevention. Really, it just started with my personal journey. I wanted to be as fit and active as I get older and not want to take a whole lot of medications. And so I started to look around for different colleges or societies that were in traditional medicine or rooted in traditional medicine that supported the same philosophy of healthy living. And that's less medications, promoting exercise, eating healthy diets, and just living a emotionally, engaging life. So I happened upon the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, and within the next year or two, I became board certified in lifestyle medicine. And it's been very interesting to see how I can implement concepts and the philosophy of lifestyle medicine within the emergency department.
You know, that's really interesting because so many of the people that I know, especially physicians that are working in lifestyle medicine, their other board is something like family practice or, one of those kind of really broad areas of practice. But to combine emergency room and lifestyle medicine, I think is a little more unusual. Because it's like, how do you do that when people are coming in because like they got hurt, they've got urgent issues, and they're seeing you in the emergency department? I'd love to kind of hear how does that work, and what are the opportunities that come up for you in that context?
Yeah, it's such an interesting dichotomy because on the one hand, we're trained at saving lives, getting patients stabilized when they're very critical. But at the same time, we do see a lot of patients where we diagnose new onset high blood pressure, or we incidentally pick up that patients have elevated blood glucose and are in fact new diabetic. So, for example, we address all kinds of similar issues that other providers address, and really it's the same patient populations that come to the emergency department that then are within the healthcare system, that are seen by primary doctors and specialists. But what's really interesting is it's important to address lifestyle in the emergency department because it might be the only time that a patient has contact with the healthcare system. And so if you don't address, for example, social connections, stress management, avoiding alcohol, tobacco, or even promoting non-sedentary lifestyle. So asking patients if they walk, if they're active. If you neglect to talk about certain factors, it might be a missed opportunity for that patient, as it might be their only touch point within the healthcare system. So that's kind of how I look at the intersection of emergency medicine and lifestyle medicine.
I love that. And I think that's so nice that you can bring that into the emergency department and touch people when you have that opportunity. And often they're more open because they're in the emergency room and something has happened that probably was unexpected. And I know that that can work as a wake-up call for people as well. So let's dive into a couple of areas in which I know we can share things that have really made a difference for people as they look to either prevent or reverse prediabetes, type 2 diabetes. And let's start with that area of activity, exercise, movement. What do we know? What is the science showing us around the connection between activity and our blood sugars?
Well, that's very, very important. I just want to really just say briefly that there are 96 million people in the US who have prediabetes, and with no intervention, 15 to 30% of those people will go on to develop full-blown diabetes within 3 to 5 years. That's a staggering number. Unfortunately, the incidence of diabetes has doubled in the last 20 years. So now we're at 38% of US adults are pre-diabetic. Half of US adults over the age of 65 are also pre-diabetic. So this is really very, very important topic. Talking about physical activity and blood sugar control. Even just a 10-minute walk after dinner will stabilize blood glucose. Single bouts of exercise, let's say slow, light to moderate activities such as walking for an hour, will lower and help stabilize blood glucose for about 24 hours. Any exercise, any exercise that's done, basically the body will continue to lower blood glucose, even if it's just for an hour or two after exercise. Even using weights, so resistance exercise can lower blood glucose by about 10 to 15%, so a little less than aerobic cardio activity. Everybody really needs to be more active, and the initial goal, if you're trying to lower blood glucose, is really to walk for 7,000 steps per day. That seems to be the minimum number required to have an effect on blood glucose. After a while, once you get a little more acclimated, you can increase your step count, but that seems to be the minimum number.
That's good to know, because that's a little bit over 3 miles for most people, and can be done in an hour of brisk walking. It's like, this isn't an extraordinary amount of exercise. And I love the fact that now we have phones that, if we happen to carry them in our pockets, can really give us a pretty accurate step count over the day and let us know how much, we're moving. But I like that. So 7,000 steps a day is a good goal to work for. And you mentioned doing it after meals. What's the advantage of doing it right after a meal?
Well, there's studies that look at either walking before meals or walking after meals. And what they found was that walking after meal has a greater effect on lowering blood glucose than walking before meals. And it probably has to do with the way that we absorb the food that we eat. So, the body wants to save fat. That's what it tries to do. It's evolutionary. It's how we're designed. And so if we can sort of stimulate after eating and say, hey, we don't need to necessarily save this, all this fuel that we just consumed, but we may want to start breaking it down a little bit because we're being active. It sort of changes the way that the signaling is set up. And so you can tend to release a little more blood glucose into the circulation. So not everything will be absorbed right away.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because I will intermittently, just kind of for informational purposes, wear a continuous glucose monitor. And I have found that it makes a huge difference to even walk for 20 to 30 minutes after a meal, that the normal after meal spike is much narrower, drops back down to normal very quickly. And that's not even like fast walking. Whereas if I skip the walk entirely, often that after meal spike is a very wide spike. It takes much longer to come back down to baseline. And I have a lot of diabetes in my family, so it's something that I'm watching for, right? And I'm wanting to stay ahead of and address. And so I love the information that a continuous glucose monitor can give us as to how our bodies are responding to the different ways in which we implement or fail to implement some of these things you're talking about. Do you recommend that people use that for that purpose, use CGMs for that purpose?
I mean, it's definitely another tool that people can use to help monitor their blood glucose. I don't see primary care patients, so I'm not continually involved with patient care, seeing them in follow-up. But I think it's definitely a tool that providers can use with their patients to help them track and monitor progress and really see what's working for that specific patient. Some things that work well for some people don't work for everybody. So, this is on average, we're talking about in general, but there might be some specific changes that are a little bit different for each patient.
Makes sense. Now, do you see a connection between stress levels and exercise and stress levels and blood sugars?
So, yeah, that's a good question. When you're very stressed, cortisol gets released, and cortisol tends to release blood glucose for obvious reasons. We have the fight or flight mechanisms that are built in place, and when we're stressed, we're sort of in that fight or flight sympathetic overdrive, and our bodies tend to mobilize glucose stores. So we'll have more glucose readily available for the ability to exercise and to act. And so in modern times, that is not always a very good thing. If we can sort of tap into the parasympathetic response, which is where we're having lower cortisol levels, it tends to have a little bit of more of an effect on stabilizing blood glucose rather than having it readily available into the bloodstream. So that's one way that stress and glucose are connected.
And then what about exercise and stress? Is there a way to address stress using exercise? And how would we do that?
So for most people, yes, exercising is very good at controlling stress. It also will help lower resting cortisol levels. And obviously, we're talking about lowering resting blood glucose levels as well. If a diabetic has a blood glucose that's over 300, they should not exercise until the glucose comes down a bit, because that can be a little bit dangerous. And while we're talking about high blood sugars, if somebody's blood glucose is over 300 and they have symptoms such as vomiting, severe dizziness, lightheadedness, that's something they should go to the emergency department for. If anybody's blood glucose is over 400, that's also an emergency. So just, of course, have to plug the emergency treatment today, being an ER doctor.
Well, I just think people need to understand that there's a real time and place when you need some intervention, and even an emergency room and a physician have their place. And those kinds of emergencies when your metabolism is out of whack can be life-threatening if not dealt with by somebody that knows what they're doing and taking care of it quickly. So I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
I remember hearing one of my family members at one point that was diabetic, and they checked their blood sugars and it was down around 100, so nothing concerning. And they got a very stressful phone call from their boss, and they happened to recheck their blood sugars right after the phone call, and without eating anything, their blood sugar had gone from 100 to 400. And so I think people need to understand that stress really can impact your blood sugar numbers in a very quick and direct fashion. So this is not like, shouldn't be way down on your priority list of things to address. It needs to be near the top because stress is such a big factor. Have you been seeing more stress related high blood sugars over the last few years than maybe you had before, or maybe you haven't noticed any difference? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. It's very difficult to actually say for certain whether somebody's blood glucose is high because of stress. I would say that overall, it does feel like we're living in more stressful times. And so perhaps there's a relationship between increase of diabetes and stress, but it's really just a hypothesis. Somebody would need to do a double-blind, placebo-controlled study to actually prove that. It can be done, but it sounds quite challenging. Really,
Yeah.
there's no way to know what's causing people's blood glucose or the incidence of prediabetes to go up. Hard to say.
Hmm. Do you think that people are experiencing any more stress on their metabolic system, like their pancreatic function, things like that, due to like environmental factors or toxins or anything else that that seems to be at higher levels now than it was maybe say 20 years ago?
Well, so aside from stress and the risks of high blood glucose, the two major things are really food, nutrition, and being sedentary and lack of exercise. Those are really the two biggest driving factors of elevated blood glucose, hyperglycemia, prediabetes, and incidence of diabetes. They're really, really major. And just to start to talk about nutrition, because I know you and I are both, excited to talk about nutrition today. The consumption of ultra processed foods, candies, chips, soda is really wreaking havoc on our metabolism and metabolic system. These are very difficult to digest. The body has a very hard time. It looks at it as a foreign substance, and it really causes a lot of inflammation and causes inflammatory cascades to develop. So that's number one, probably the most important thing driving increased incidence of diabetes. And of course, we can talk about other nutritional significant advice recommendations today. But the other thing is this sedentary lifestyle. People are more sedentary. It's a lot easier to not be active today than ever before. People are spending more time alone, more time on their screens, less walking, more driving. People that live in cities tend to be more active because they're walking more and there's more public transportation available. But typically, we're living in a more sedentary world. So it's really the combination of the nutrition and the lack of physical activity that's really driving the increased incidence of prediabetes and diabetes.
That makes sense. Before we jump into nutrition for a few minutes, one other question I had around exercise was, we've talked about like walking, aerobic style exercise. We've talked about weightlifting. Are there any other specific types of exercise that can really help with glucose metabolism?
I think the biggest takeaway is that all movement can help stabilize blood glucose, whether it's yoga, just stretching, flexibility. The act of moving really helps the body process glucose and limit hyperglycemia or elevated blood glucose. So really, I think it's the fact that, number one, it's not being sedentary and moving throughout the day. There's also a lot of studies out there that show that exercise doesn't have to be done continuously. It doesn't have to be done in a 30 or 40-minute time block. It can be done standing up for 5 minutes once every half hour, for example, has also been shown to help with overall metabolism and basically breaking up sedentary time. And so if you can, walk for a few minutes here and there throughout the day, or just be active, breaking up sedentary time also has a lot of benefits. So really, it's just about being physically active and not sitting for too long. There was
Yeah.
one study I just thought of, if I can just tell you
Yes.
one more thing. So they took people who were sedentary, but they exercised for an hour a day by running on a treadmill.
Okay.
So for 23 hours, they were sedentary, but they had 1 hour of exercise. And they compared that group of patients with, or they weren't patients, they were people. They compared that group with another group who were more active throughout the day. And they found significant changes in the way that exercise affected their fat storage. So we're talking about fat
Mm.
storage. We're not talking about blood glucose, but
Mhm.
it was very interesting because there was a term was coined after that study called exercise intolerance, meaning that the body has a way of making it exercise resistant, that the effects of exercise then become resistant if you're mostly living
Mm.
in a sedentary, uh, if most of your time is spent sedentary, so that you have difficulty mobilizing the fat stores, so that the positive
Mm.
effects of exercise get blunted because of the other 23 hours of the day where you're sedentary. So it's just more important to actually move throughout the day than it is just to get that exercise
Mm.
time. So something else for people to consider.
I think that's fascinating, but that's also really important for people to understand. It's like you can't make up for sitting at a desk all day by running on the treadmill once an evening, right? And so, really looking at is finding excuses to get up and move. Maybe it's go get a drink of water, maybe it's run down to the copy machine, just doing something that gets you out of your chair at least every 30 to 60 minutes, something like that. Does that sound good?
Exactly right.
All righty. Well, that's great. So let's just take a few minutes here and talk about nutritional approaches to lowering blood sugar and especially lowering insulin resistance. We talked about ultra processed, ultra refined foods being inflammatory. So, what can we do food wise, nutrition wise, that's anti inflammatory, that actually lowers inflammation levels in our body instead of pushing them?
So when I think of inflammation, I immediately think of trans fats. The trans fats are
Mm.
things are a group of fats that are found in very, very bad foods such as donuts, highly processed foods, and even things like coffee creamer. I know a lot of people use coffee creamer. Um, Trans fats wreak havoc in the metabolic system. They promote fat storage, they raise cholesterol, and they're, in my opinion, well, they're also a highly addictive. They Companies are not required to list any trans fats on their products under one, I think it's 1 gram or one unit of trans fat. They can say they have zero if it's less than one. So that's interesting. So you
Per
can have a product
serving. I think per serving, right?
per serving.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's in
that's
the per
correct, per
serving.
serving.
Yeah.
So you can actually have
Yeah,
a product that says zero trans fat, but it actually does contain up to 1 gram per
per serving.
per
Yeah.
serving.
Yeah,
But
that's
so
kind of
that's
sneaky.
number one, is the trans
Okay.
fat. Number two is just processed foods, foods that come in bags and boxes. Like I was saying before, these are very difficult to digest and they will spike blood glucose. So minimizing trans fats, minimizing processed foods, probably the most important first steps to take.
Hmm. And then, as we want to look at foods that fight inflammation, what kinds of foods are we looking at there?
Sure. So foods that prevent the encouragement or development of diabetes and blood glucose are foods that are high in fiber.
Mm.
Fiber is found in fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, nuts, and seeds. And fiber actually slows general digestion, um, contains higher water content and will promote, it will not allow for blood sugar spikes in general. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how fiber can stabilize blood glucose.
That sounds like a very important component. Now, is there any fiber, like if I have a really tough cut of meat or something like that, it's really chewy, does that mean it has fiber in it?
Actually, animal products do not contain any fiber. So
Mm,
meat, chicken, fish do not have fiber.
mm,
Most people eat animal products for their protein content, but the truth is that there are plenty of plant-based sources of protein that have the double benefit of protein and high fiber. And these are
mm.
really very important that diabetics or people at risk for diabetes or just basically anybody really choose plant-based sources of protein for the extra fiber intake. So,
I
for
think that's
example,
such, yeah, that's really important. Keep going.
yeah, a serving of beans, cooked beans, can have anywhere between 10 to 15 grams of fiber, as well as that amount of protein. So, beans are really a superfood when it comes to talking about diabetes, fiber, protein. Other foods, for example, so cooked grains tend to have about 5 grams of fiber. An avocado is very high in fiber, having about 15 grams for a whole avocado. So just to get a sense
Yeah.
of fiber and of fiber content of food. And really, the recommendations are to consume over 30 grams of fiber per day. It's a little higher for men than for women, but um, eating fiber basically at every meal will also help slow the digestion and the breakdown of other foods that are eaten at the same time.
Sounds like it would be a good idea then to have some kind of plant foods as a major part of our plate for every meal to make sure we're getting that fiber. I've heard recommendations as high as 45 grams a day or more of fiber. And yet the standard American diet, I believe, has more like 15 grams of fiber. So we really are looking at the importance of adding plants to our plate to have those benefits of fiber, and it helps to fight inflammation by lowering blood sugars because our high blood sugars create inflammation in our bodies, very irritating to the tissues. So that's one of the really important ways I think that we can address inflammation. What about things like nutrient density, vitamins, minerals, phytochemicals, things like that? How important are they in this scenario of fighting inflammation?
Yeah, when you talk about nutrient density, I immediately think of the excess caloric intake that is in the standard American diet. And a lot of it's due to excess oils. So,
Mm,
if you're adding a lot of oil to your food, or restaurant food has a lot of sources of hidden oils, it doesn't really it doesn't register in your stomach that you just consumed 400 calories of a saturated fat in the form of oil. And so it doesn't give you the signal that, oh, wow, I just consumed 400 calories, so I'm getting full.
mm,
But on the opposite end of the spectrum is, yes, like you mentioned, a nutrient dense food. Let's say, for example, quinoa. So if you were to eat 400 calories of quinoa, you would know you just ate 400 calories of quinoa. And you really wouldn't you wouldn't feel like you would consume another, giant number of calories at the same time. And you're also getting the benefits of the nutrient density within that food. For some reason, people think of whole grains or even quinoa, which is actually a seed, as not being of high nutritional value, when in fact, all whole grains have fiber, but they also have vitamins and minerals. Now, they have
mm.
zinc, they have magnesium, they have all kinds of micronutrients. So, yes, if you can maximize your nutrient density and get the benefits of, feeling full, that's really the
Mhm.
way to go.
Yeah, I like that. So sounds like deprivation and starvation are not the answer here, but actually the satisfaction that we can get from eating a variety of whole plant-based foods every meal is going to make a big difference for our bodies and our ability to handle sugar. And I really appreciate that, because I think that these are important messages for people to be getting. Now, I know that you are also been working on a tool to help people with their health. You want to take just a couple of minutes to talk about that, and what is the purpose, and is it
Yeah,
available
yeah,
yet? Like, let people know about it.
yeah. There is a digital tool that I've created to help patients along on their healthcare journey. So, for example, a patient with diabetic, as we're talking about today, there's specific foods that can help lower blood glucose that are given to patients. There are exercise recommendations, and all of the recommendations are written in a health coaching format. And these are for other providers to give to their patients. They are for all kinds of specialists, primary care clinicians, even emergency providers. And they help patients on their healthcare journey, and they're sent directly to patients that patients can use, refer back on their own. And it's really a bridge to help patients become healthier in between clinician appointments. And it also helps to augment current discharge instructions, for example, from the emergency department. So it kind of gives patients everything they need to know, so they don't have to go searching endlessly online for information. You know, the problem these days is there's so much information available. And so being able to take all of the evidence, all of the studies, give it to patients directly for each medical diagnosis is my goal for this current project that I'm working on.
I love that. So if I'm understanding correctly, it's a resource, especially for health professional use, so that they can easily give lifestyle recommendations to the clients, the patients that they're working with. Is that correct? And I know
You
that we
got
have
it.
some health professionals that are in my community. Is there some contact information that we'll be able to share with them, maybe in the description of this video, of how they can contact you to get access to that app?
Yeah, absolutely. You just go to gobeyondmeds.com. So that's one word, gobeyondmeds.com, and basically fill out the form and somebody will reach out to you to get you started.
I love that. I love that as a resource for people that are helping other people with their health. So if your doctor doesn't have this app, you might recommend it to them as well. So it's something that they could pick up and they could be using with patients that they're seeing on a day-to-day basis in the clinic. And I just really appreciate that you've taken the time to share with us from your experience and from your knowledge base about how we can use these areas of exercise and nutrition to really help our bodies to function better. Do you have like a final like word of wisdom or advice or tip that you would want our listeners to take away with them today?
Well, really just to increase your activity levels, so be active. Choose real food when you have choices. So whole foods, plant predominant, make sure you get lots of fiber in your diet. And just one more thing, herbs and spices we didn't get to talk about, but
it's true.
Herbs and spices can also help stabilize blood glucose. So eating a whole food variety of plant-based foods, being active, moderating stress as best you can, spending time with other people. These are ways that we can help lower blood glucose.
That's amazing. I just want to say thank you so much for being with us here today. Remember, to all our listeners, that health is wealth, and it comes by choice, not by chance. Thank you for taking this time to be with us here today.
Thanks for having me.